In this video, we will demonstrate entering purchase orders in UAN. We'll talk about all four types of purchase orders. Remember, these are all just tools to encumber or set aside appropriations for specific purposes. At UAN, we sometimes refer to all as purchase orders, but there are really four different types. I'll include several examples of regular purchase orders and regular blanket certificates. We'll focus mainly on those, but we'll also do a good example of a super blanket certificate. And regarding the infamous PO then and now, we'll save that for a later video. If you're new to this, you may be wondering, why are there four types? What is the difference between the four types? When to use one type and when to use another type? Well, sorry, you won't get the answers in this short video. Our focus here is on the mechanics of entering different type of purchase order examples into UAN. But don't worry, we have training for that, prerequisite courses. If you haven't done so yet, watch our prerequisite training on this topic. You can find them under Training Transition. And that's course 102, chapter 4. It's a longer video, but you can jump to the purchase order section in the YouTube table of contents or find it in the corresponding manual. Another question UAN support gets, often in a panic from new fiscal officers, is what account code should I use on purchases and new payments? Well, UAN support is not authorized to answer this question, as we've mentioned in other places. But you have other resources, as we've mentioned. And as a new fiscal officer, I would always start with reports, such as the purchase order status, among other reports. You can look at your prior fiscal officer's purchase orders and payment history, but keep in mind that if the previous fiscal officer was cited on their last audit for posting payments to the wrong account for similar items you're looking into, you would never want to use their account code example. But if you're following in the footsteps of someone who did a very good job, you can use the reports to find what account codes they used on similar transactions. If you can't trust the payment history, though, or if this is a new type of expense, your next step is to review the Uniform Chart of Accounts to get complete code descriptions. If you're still stumped, then contact the auditor state assigned to your region or a local government services auditor. Just click Contact Us on the AOS website to find their phone and email address. Well, that's enough talk about that. Let's move forward to some purchase order demonstrations. If you're a new fiscal officer, the first thing you need to do is get an idea of what purchase orders are currently open. Did the previous fiscal officer enter permanent appropriations and the purchase orders for the rest of the year on items they already knew would need to be certified? Or did they leave the job for you to do? If they used blanket certificates, are the open BCs expired or close to their expiration date? Or do any purchase orders have an unusually low balance? Well, to answer these questions and more, go to Accounting, Reports and Statements, Purchase Order Reports. Of course, at your office, you can look at your printed purchase orders and blanket certificates. They're going to give you the same information I'm showing you. The purchase order detail is the first report in the group, but that's a one-page report per item, so it's a bit too detailed to start this review. We'll change it to the PO listing report. You can use the Filters tab to narrow it down to one type at a time if you like. I'll start with my regular blanket certificates. Select all of the open ones and display. This is a wide report to display, so I'll zoom in a bit. In Training Land, we are currently in April. So on this report, we can easily see that all of our BCs are expired. The expiration date means that no new purchases or commitments to purchase can be made against these purchase orders. The authority expired on March 31st for most of them, and for some it expired last year. The ones dated last year means that the purchase was authorized with the purchase order last year, but the bill for the goods or services did not come until this year. In that case, The purchase order can carry over to the new year so that the bill can be paid when it's received, but no new purchases can be applied to an expired PO or BC. The same principle applies to BCs that expired on March 31st of this year. It appears that the policy in place at Buckeye Township is that BCs are open for each quarter. Pretty soon we'll need to replace most of these BCs, since it's early April, with ones that expire at the end of the second quarter. Now I can use the filter to just choose my purchase order regular type purchase orders. We can see that none of the PO regulars in this list have expiration dates, and that's very normal. It's not required. I've already checked, and our township currently doesn't have any BC Super or Then and Now POs open, so we don't have to bother with that. So that's the PO listing. The purchase order status is also in this list. This is a really wide report, so I'll just zoom out and we'll page through this a little bit. The purchase order status is great to get a little bit more detail, but not too much. It's a great way to check to see if you have a low balance on some of your purchase orders, or maybe low for certain account codes on the PO. If you do, you may need to replace them with new ones. You'll need to find out if the particular PO was for a one-time expense or for a recurring bill. But you'll have to determine that for your entity. So let's move on to actually posting some examples of our purchase order. To add a purchase order in UEN, we open Accounting, Transactions, Purchase Orders. If we have any items that are a work in progress, they will be in our batch list. Click the Add button to pick one of the four types. We'll start by adding a simple PO regular type. Start the form by picking the vendor. I'll type in Treasurer of State, and I can pick it from my list. This is one of those vendors that has several locations. Since the Treasurer of State often has different locations for various fees, at your entity, you may have several more than we do. And if you gave the location a meaningful description like we did, then it's easy to pick. This PO is for UEN and audit fees. Notice the expire date is not green. That means it's not a required field. The issue and certified date are required and are generally set to today's date. I just started this purchase order to authorize spending for the remainder of the fiscal year. So my issue date is going to be today's calendar date in Training Land, which is April 1st. So I'll enter that for my issue and certified date. Notice that I can choose today instead of choosing the actual date. Sometimes that's easier. The detail list area starts with a place for a requisition number. If you don't have internal requisition numbers, you can leave it blank. You must enter a quantity, though, to calculate against the unit price. I'll put in 1 for our example. I'll skip the unit field for now and I'll enter a description. $1,295. Tab over, you can see that's calculated times 1, my quantity times unit. Now back to the unit description. This is simply a specific description field in addition to the normal description area on the purchase order. It's totally optional. I could put in something like 3/4 for the UEN lease. Again, I could have added that description under the description field and left the unit blank, and that would be perfectly fine. But the unit does not calculate into any of the actual dollar calculations. So your use of it is your preference. I'll click the arrow to add it to my detail list, and I can see that I have 2,295 undistributed. I need to distribute that to an account code or codes to encumber on my appropriation budget. So I'll go to the distribution list, and start typing in my code, and I can scroll down to the code that is in that fund. It fills in the amount since I have enough in my appropriations. That's the amount they actually need. I'll be using one code, so I'll press enter to add that to my distribution list. And now I can click on remember dates until form closes since I have at least one more purchase order regular. That'll save me a little bit of time. Now I'm going to add another PO regular for my monthly electric bill. That's Sparkly Electric. This will authorize the electric bill payment for the rest of the year. I estimate all the electric bills we have to pay for all the monthly invoices will be about $9,000. Now we're going to distribute that to multiple account codes. I can choose each account code by typing them in, is one option. Here you'll choose electricity, but notice the menu. There isn't $9,000 available. That's in this one account code. That's how much I have to distribute. But there is $900 estimated unencumbered balance. So UEN is automatically filling in that amount when I tab over or select it. In other examples, that may not be the amount you intend to use, but in our case, the electricity account code will only be spent on electricity. So it's exactly what I want to do. I want to use the full amount for the rest of the year's bills. Now I've got 8,100 to continue to distribute to other account codes in different funds. Before I do that, I want to show you a different way of picking the account codes. You can select the column headings to sort. If I choose account name, then I can scroll down to my electricity, and they're all grouped together. So I'll continue. Notice how the account sorting remains when I go to the next account code. Now I can save. Oh, look, this message is telling me that the purchase order will be saved without a vendor location. Well, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to cancel the message and pick an address. Sometimes vendors will have multiple addresses, and you'll want to choose the address that you'll be mailing the payments to, so it defaults to that address whenever you add a payment using this purchase order. So I'll pick one, and now I can save. Our next example is when you have an internal requisition. If your entity uses printed requisitions, you'll fill out your purchase orders using those. We have an approved requisition submitted by our fire chief for a fire training course, and our fiscal officer is allowed to add a PO from that. You have to understand your internal policies that will allow purchase orders to be posted. Now, the first two examples we did were examples of expenses that the fiscal officer knew needed to be in place for utilities and other reoccurring fees like that. For these reoccurring expenses, there's no need to post a monthly purchase order. You can set aside those appropriations for the rest of the year's invoices because you know they are coming. Like with Sparkly Electric, we opened that purchase order for the remaining 9 months and it had sufficient amount of appropriations to cover each of those monthly bills. But this is something you need to do for just one expense. The fire chief wants to send 5 employees away for training, and it has been approved. So we'll look at our requisition and pick the vendor, and it looks like it's for the Center of Training Excellence. If it has a requisition number like ours does, we can type that in. quantity is 5. My unit price is $250. And since my quantity is 5, it's going to calculate the total out to $1,250, which is what I need. I'll add the account code, which is actually listed on our requisition. Notice I remembered that I sorted by account name, so I can switch that over to account code and find the one that I need. Training services. Sometimes requisitions do not have an account code. They might only have the fund, and you as a fiscal officer have to determine which account code to use. Now I can click Save, and I will close. Now I want to show you an example similar to the electric company payment example, but I'm going to add this one in a different way using the duplicate button instead of the add button. I want to add a PO for our employer share of employees' insurance premiums. The duplicate button can save quite a bit of time if you have routine purchase orders that you certify year after year or blanket certificates that you open quarterly. I'll start by selecting the type. This is going to be a PO regular, and I can choose from open purchase orders, closed purchase orders, or both. I'll choose open. I'll choose open because I happen to know there's one open with a small unspent balance remaining. I need to get around to closing it, but that's another topic. I can sort by column headings to find it. Here, I found it. Notice the list shows the original amount, not the current balance. I know from looking at my purchase order status report that this has only $2 left unspent. Before I duplicate it, I must choose a new issue date and a new certified date. Then I'll just click OK and close, and it's in my batch list. So don't just go and post this. Always review it in the edit screen or in batch reports before posting the duplicate. In this case, we're encumbering a larger amount, so we definitely must edit. I can confirm the address first, make sure that hasn't changed, and then revise my amount and distribution to our current needs. Again, like utilities, this is a predictable expense, so I will post this purchase order for the amount we need to set aside for the remainder of the year. First of all, I can see a typing error our fiscal officer missed last time. The amount in this new purchase order is going to be significantly more, $91,660. I can see that these are the same group of account codes that I want to use, so the easiest way to do this is just to update the amounts to encumber, rather than adding them all over again. So I'll just type over the amounts. One area of this form I haven't shown you yet is the additional tab. I'll click on that now, and we can see that last time they put in a purpose. Sometimes a fiscal officer may want to include additional notes in the purpose. It looks like in this case they included the same note in the purpose, and that has to do with various reports that you can print in UEN that will show either the description or the purpose field, depending on the nature of the report. Well, but more on that later. Now that everything is distributed, we've confirmed all of the address and the amounts and descriptions, we can save our purchase order. and close. Well, now I'm done for purchase order regulars for the day. I can post these together, or I could post them one at a time. And I'll select Post and Print. I'll just show you one example. Now we'll take a look at BC regular purchase orders. That's blanket certificates. I'll demonstrate adding a set of 2 blanket certificates using the Add button, and then 2 more using the Duplicate button. This first set is for office supplies for our administrative staff and fire departments. Click Add and choose BC Regular. Hopefully you watched the prerequisite videos as I suggested. If yes, you understand that a blank certificate is for multiple vendors setting aside an appropriation account, just one account for spending of a particular type rather than for a specific vendor. Then it'll make sense to you that on this blanket certificate form, the vendor is not a required field and we can just leave it blank. Most of the time, to enter a vendor for a BC defeats the whole purpose of using the BC. For example, we want to be able to use this blanket certificate for purchases at several different office supply stores. Another difference is the expires date is green. A blanket certificate must have an expiration date. The expiration date is internally set by your entity. Your governing board adopts a policy that says all regular blanket certificates are going to be available for such and such length of time. Now, the latest any local government can set an expiration date is December 31st. You should never incur new expenses on a BC after the year end. I'll choose the issue date in today's training land of April 1st. Notice the expires date automatically filled in the last date of the second quarter. It does this because we set this as a default policy at Buckeye Township in our general maintenance setup for all regular BCs. You, however, may have to fill this in, and certainly your policy may be different. I'll select my certified date and a quantity of 1. I don't need to fill in the description. It's not required. We're setting aside $750 for our fiscal officer and administrative staff for office supplies. That's the one I want. Now I can click Remember Dates until form closes and save. The other BC we'll add is for office supplies for our fire department. So again, a quantity of 1. $500 in this case. I'll select just one account code. Once again, only one for blank certificates. Click Save, and I could add some more. But you get the idea. This is how you add blank certificate regulars. So I'll just click on Close, and we'll post this group before we move on to the next set. And here's what the blanket certificates look like. I do need to add 2 more BC regulars for operating supplies, but I'll show you that using the Duplicate button. I'll choose BC Regular and both open and closed blanket certificates. I'll enter in the new dates. And sort whenever it makes it easier. I'm just selecting 2 items for this basic demonstration, but I think the Duplicate button is handy for BC regulars, especially when your policy expires them quarterly like ours does. You can duplicate as many as you need, and there's not much editing to do because they don't require a vendor, an address, or a description, and they only require 1 account code. These duplicates are not in the amounts we want to encumber, so I'll need to edit. The first one is for operating supplies for our cemetery sexton. This duplicate has the correct account, but I need to budget more in this quarter, the second quarter, so I'll change the price and distribution. Saving advances me to the next BC to edit. It's for operating supplies for our fire department, and so I just need to bump that up an extra $500 to $2,500. You can see how easy it is to run through these examples. If for various purposes you had 20 blank certificates that expire and need replacing quarterly, you can see how using the duplicate button can make short work of that. And close. And now we can post and print these two. Now we will add a super blanket certificate for gas for the fire trucks. Well, a blanket certificate regular can only have one blanket certificate open for a particular account code. You can't have a second blanket certificate open with the same account code within the same time period. The fire chief at Buckeye Township likes the gas to be on a separate BC from the other operating supplies. You just watched me add a blanket certificate regular for operating supplies for the fire department, so I can't add a second BC for that account again in the same period. Instead, we will demonstrate opening a super blanket certificate for that purpose. This exercise assumes the purpose meets the legal criteria to open a super BC, which may or may not be the case in your situation. Notice the Super BC, according to our policy, is automatically set to expire in December. Once again, we've set this up in the general maintenance area, and again, your policy might be different. I'll enter the dates. Our quantity will be 1. And the amount we're setting aside is $5,000 for gas. I'll choose my account code for the fire department. Remember, this is the same account I put the regular BC on. Any other purchases they make, little things they buy, those will be made off the regular blanket certificate, but all fuel purchases will be made off the Super BC. I forgot to enter a description. In this case, I would want to have that on the blanket certificate. It's specifically for this purpose. It's nice that we can add it directly without starting all over on that line. So for us, this will help ensure that the chief has appropriations set aside for fuel payments throughout the year and help prevent the account's use for unrelated operating supplies. We can use the BC regular for those. So we'll save and close and post and print. Finally, the last type is the PO then and now. I'm not going to go over a then and now purchase order in this video. It should only be used when someone has made a payment without the proper certification ahead of the payment, which of course is frowned upon by audit. So we'll save this for another video after you've learned about payments in UAN. Well, you've hung around this long in the video, just in time for a bonus tip. I'll just show you a printout in a moment of the Treasurer of State purchase order and the Sparkly Electric Company purchase order we opened up earlier. Notice with Sparkly Electric, then my note under the purpose is identical to the description. If you recall, I did not type in this field. That's because I set UAN in the User Preferences form to do this every time. Notice the checkbox where it says, if the purpose is left blank, automatically fill it in from the description fields on the detail grid once the purchase order is posted. This is helpful when you print some reports that include the purchase order purpose and not the description, or vice versa. Also note that the unit description for the treasurer does not copy over into the purpose on my reports, only the description. So if I wanted that note about the 3/4 to show up in the purpose field, I would want to make sure that I entered that into the normal description field rather than the unit. This is a minor point, but thanks for hanging on. Well, for now, that wraps up our purchase order examples. Don't forget to report all of your UAN training for Fiscal Integrity Act credit. Following the Auditor State's guidelines and deadlines on the training portal.